Hey everyone, tonight we're journeying back to a time when the fate of an empire, the outcome of monumental battles, and the careers of some of history's most powerful men could hinge on, well, chickens. Imagine yourself not in your comfortable bed, but perhaps on the cool, dew dampened stone of an ancient Roman encampment, the pre dawn chill seeping into your bones. The air isn't filled with the gentle hum of your refrigerator, but with the distant snorts of war horses, the clink of legionary armor, and the hushed, anxious whispers of men about to face the unknown. And at the center of this tension, a coop of rather important poultry. It's a world where divine will was sought not through complex algorithms or detailed weather reports, but through the pecking order, quite literally. Frankly, considering the stakes and the rather unpredictable nature of fowl, you probably wouldn't have survived this, especially if your job was to interpret their breakfast habits. Let's just say, a picky eater could spell doom for thousands. So before you get all comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps more than you know, and it certainly helps me keep these historical deep dives coming. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now dim those lights, maybe get that fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in the pre-dawn gloom of what feels like a military camp, though the grand, marble-veined structures in the distance suggest you're closer to Rome itself than some far-flung frontier. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth, wood smoke from dying fires, and something else, something sharp and vaguely agricultural. It's the unmistakable aroma of birds, but not just any birds. You're near the sacred enclosure, a specially designated area, usually a tent or a carefully cordoned off patch of ground where the puli sacri, the sacred chickens, are kept. You are, for the purpose of our journey tonight, a newly appointed attendant to the Polarius, the chief augur responsible for these feathered oracles. It's a position of surprising significance, though perhaps not one that comes with a lot of overt glory. Think of it as being the roadie for a rock star, but the rock star is a chicken, and the concert is the future of Rome. No pressure. Your heart thumps a little faster than usual, a nervous flutter that has nothing to do with the morning chill. Today is a dies comiculis, a day when public assemblies can be held, and more importantly, a day when a magistrate, perhaps even a consul or a general on the cusp of a major campaign, will seek the auspicia ex tripudiis, divination from the sacred chickens. You tiptoe closer to the enclosure. It's not a palace for poultry, mind you, more like a very well maintained, secure coop. These aren't your average farmyard birds scratching in the dirt for worms. Oh no, these chickens are state sanctioned prophets. They are fed a special diet, often a type of soft cake or pulse, and their every cluck and peck is observed with an intensity usually reserved for gladiatorial combat or a particularly dramatic Senate debate. You've heard whispers that some particularly pious emperors even ensured their sacred chickens had, shall we say, slightly more luxurious travel arrangements than some junior officials. One can only imagine the logistics meeting. All right, lads, the Emperor's Legion is marching on Gaul. We need provisions, siege engines, and a first-class carriage for Clucky Augustus. The Polarius himself, a man named Marcus, emerges from his own small tent. He's older, with lines etched around his eyes that speak of countless dawns spent just like this one, peering at poultry. He carries a small, ornate cage. Inside, a rather plump, white hen shifts nervously. This isn't just breakfast, it's destiny on the menu. Marcus gives you a curt nod, his face a mask of solemnity. The general arrives at first light, he murmurs, his voice raspy. Ensure the ground is swept. No distractions for the sacred bird. You understand? A stray pebble, a sudden shadow, could influence the hen's feeding, and thus the interpretation of the divine will. It's a bit like trying to get a toddler to eat their vegetables while a marching band goes past the window. Tricky. The practice of auspicium was deeply ingrained in Roman society, a cornerstone of their state religion. No significant public act, be it a battle, the founding of a city, or the passing of a law, was undertaken without first consulting the will of the gods. While there were many forms of augury, from observing the flight of birds, ex avibus, to interpreting lightning strikes, ex caelo, the tripudium from the sacred chickens became particularly popular for military commanders in the fields. It was portable, relatively quick, and provided a clear, if sometimes frustratingly ambiguous, answer. Generals, men who commanded legions and held the power of life and death over thousands, would wait, breath held, for a chicken to eat. It's a rather humbling thought, isn't it? The most powerful men in the world, reduced to spectators at a bird feeder. You carefully sweep the designated patch of earth with a bundle of twigs. Marcus places the cage down, orienting it with meticulous care. The ground must be just so. The light must fall correctly. There are rules, unwritten and ancient, that govern every aspect of this ritual. He then produces a small bag of specially prepared grain. This isn't just any chicken feed, it's part of the sacred rite. Some accounts suggest it was a kind of mush or soft pulse, designed to be easy for the chickens to gobble up quickly, and crucially, to spill. The key to a favorable omen, the tripudium solistimum, occurred when the chickens ate so greedily that the food fell from their beaks and struck the ground. This was the divine equivalent of a thumbs up. If the chickens refused to eat, or ate hesitantly, or Jupiter forbid, made distressed noises, or tried to escape the cage, the omens were considered unfavorable. Imagine the poor Polarius having to report that to a notoriously short-tempered general. Sir, the chicken, well, it looked at the grain, gave a sort of disdainful cluck, and turned its back. So maybe postpone the invasion of Parthia, probably not a career-enhancing move. One of the more bizarre details surrounding this practice is the sheer level of coddling these chickens sometimes received. While their ultimate fate, if they consistently gave bad omens, might be less than glamorous, ending up in a pot wasn't unheard of, though officially denied. Their day-to-day existence could be surprisingly privileged. They were, after all, conduits to the divine. Stories abound of them being transported in special litters, attended by a whole retinue. It makes you wonder if they developed little feathered egos. Excuse me, attendant, this grain is not up to my usual divine standard. And could you fetch my tiny golden water dish? As the sky begins to lighten from inky black to a bruised purple, you hear the tramp of disciplined feet. A small retinue approaches. At its head is a man you recognize instantly from statues and coins, General Fabius Maximus, a figure of immense authority, his face set in a grim expression. The weight of an upcoming campaign against a troublesome Germanic tribe is clearly upon him. He stops a respectful distance away, his gaze fixed on Marcus and the cage. The silence is thick, broken only by the distant whinny of a horse and the almost inaudible scratching of the hen within its confines. Marcus unlatches the cage door. This is the moment. He scatters a handful of the sacred grain on the swept earth before the opened cage. The hen, whose name you've learned is Fortuna, no pressure Fortuna, hesitates for a moment, her head cocked. You find yourself holding your breath. Everyone is. The fate of the campaign, the lives of thousands of soldiers, the reputation of a renowned general, all seemingly dependent on a single hen's appetite. It feels like the universe has zoomed in on this tiny patch of ground. If these chickens had agents, they'd be demanding top billing on all military dispatches. The Legions of Rome, featuring special guest star Fortuna the chicken. The hen takes a tentative step out of the cage, then another. She eyes the grain. General Fabius shifts his weight, the leather of his armor creaking softly, a sound that seems thunderous in the stillness. Marcus remains impassive, a statue carved from worried stone. You try to look equally composed, but your palms are sweating. What if she's not hungry? What if a rogue gust of wind spooks her? The variables seem endless. You suddenly appreciate the stress levels of ancient Roman weather forecasters, except their forecasts had fewer feathers and beaks. Historians still debate, with no small amount of academic gusto, the extent to which these chicken-based divinations were, shall we say, stage-managed. Could a savvy Polarius, eager to please a powerful patron or genuinely believing a certain course of action was best, subtly influence the outcome? It's certainly plausible. Perhaps the chickens were kept deliberately hungry before an important consultation to ensure they'd eat with the required enthusiasm. Or maybe a particularly uncooperative bird might find itself accidentally jostled, causing grain to spill. It's one of those historical gray areas where the line between faith, pragmatism, and outright manipulation becomes wonderfully blurry. One scholar even wryly suggested that the true art of the Polarius was less about interpreting divine will and more about chicken psychology and subtle stagecraft. Knowing when to underfeed the prophets was key to a long career, he might have quipped over a glass of Falernian wine. Fortuna, however, seems blissfully unaware of the historical debates she's posthumously inspiring. She pecks once, twice, at the scattered grain. Each tiny movement is scrutinized. Is she eating with vigor? Does she seem content? These are the questions racing through everyone's mind. The general's aide, a young man with an earnest, worried face, scribbles furiously on a wax tablet, presumably noting every nuance of the hen's breakfast etiquette. You can imagine his notes. 0532 hours. Subject Fortuna approached grain pile. Appears contemplative. Possible subtle hesitation in leftward head tilt. Or maybe she just has a stiff neck. Gods, I need more sleep. The sun is now peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows and painting the clouds in hues of orange and pink. It's a beautiful dawn, but no one is looking at the sky. All eyes are on Fortuna. She starts to eat more steadily now, her little head bobbing up and down. Grain scatters. A few pieces fall from her beak and hit the packed earth with tiny, almost inaudible clicks. Marcus allows himself the smallest exhalation of breath. It's not a full-blown tripudium solistimum yet, not the everything is awesome sign from the gods, but it's promising. It's not a flat-out refusal. In the high-stakes game of chicken divination, not terrible is often good enough to get the ball rolling. You can almost feel the collective tension in the camp lesson by a minuscule fraction. Soldiers, who had been studiously avoiding looking in your direction, now steal quick glances. A good omen, even a mildly good one, could mean the difference between a confident advance and a day spent in anxious uncertainty. It makes you wonder about the times the omens were bad. How did they break the news? Did they use a very small apologetic trumpet? Or perhaps a "Sorry, the gods say no" banner, waved sadly from a distance? This whole process, you reflect, is a fascinating intersection of profound belief and practical necessity. For the Romans, the gods were not distant, abstract entities. They were active participants in human affairs. Appeasing them, understanding their intentions, was paramount. And if the gods chose to communicate their desires through the digestive habits of a specially consecrated chicken, then who were mortals to question the methodology? It's a far cry from today's strategic planning sessions with PowerPoint presentations and risk assessment matrices. Though one could argue that some modern corporate decisions seem just as reliant on inscrutable signs and hopeful interpretations. Well, Johnson from accounting sneezed twice during the budget proposal. That's got to be a good sign for Q3 earnings, right? Marcus slowly raises a hand, signaling the end of the observation period. Fortuna, having had her fill, or perhaps just bored of being the center of imperial attention, wanders a little, pecking idly at a non-existent crumb. The general and his retinue approach Marcus. There are no cheers, no dramatic pronouncements, just a low murmur of conversation. Marcus will now formally interpret what he has witnessed and deliver his report. His words will be carefully chosen, laden with the gravity of the occasion. He's not just a chicken keeper. He's a reader of divine intent, a vital cog in the machinery of the Roman state. And you, his humble assistant, have been a silent witness to this peculiar yet profoundly important ritual that has shaped the course of an empire, one peck at a time. You let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding for the last 20 minutes. It's certainly a more interesting start to the day than just fetching coffee, though given the stress, a strong cup of Roman-style Posca wouldn't go amiss right about now. The morning sun, now fully risen, bathes the camp in a warmer light, though the air still holds a crispness. General Fabius Maximus has departed, the expression on his face neither joyous nor despairing, but rather one of stoic acceptance. Fortuna the hen had indeed eaten, and some grain had satisfyingly struck the earth. Not an overwhelming torrent of divine approval, perhaps, but enough. Marcus, the Polarius, had delivered his interpretation in low, measured tones. The gods show favor, but counsel prudence. Victory will come through caution, not haste. It was a classic augural pronouncement, just specific enough to be useful, yet vague enough to cover various outcomes. A bit like a modern weather forecast predicting a chance of weather. You suppose it kept the gods from looking too foolish if things went sideways, and the Polarius from looking like he was making it all up, which of course he wasn't. Perish the thought. You help Marcus secure Fortuna back in her traveling coupe, ready for the next high-stakes breakfast consultation. As you work, you reflect on how much an entire military campaign, the lives of thousands, could be subtly steered by a hen's appetite. It's a system built on faith, tradition, and perhaps a healthy dose of hopeful interpretation. But what happened when the chickens weren't so obliging? What if Fortuna had simply turned her feathered backside to the grain and refused to peck a single morsel? The historical records, as you've been learning in your new, rather niche apprenticeship, are peppered with such uncomfortable moments, and the reactions to them vary wildly, from cautious retreat to, well, outright defiance, with rather splashy consequences. One name that echoes through the annals of chicken-related impiety is that of Publius Claudius Pulcher. Now there was a Roman consul who really knew how to make an impression, albeit not always the best kind. Picture this. It's 249 BC, during the First Punic War. Rome and Carthage are locked in a bitter struggle for control of the Mediterranean. Pulcher is commanding the Roman fleet, preparing for a crucial naval battle off the coast of Sicily, near the city of Drepana. The pressure is immense. Naval battles are notoriously unpredictable, a chaotic dance of ramming ships, screaming men, and the ever-present threat of drowning in a churning, unforgiving sea. Naturally, before engaging the Carthaginian fleet, Pulcher does as any good Roman commander should. He calls for the sacred chickens. You can imagine the scene on the flagship. The deck is probably slick with sea spray, the air thick with the smell of salt, tar, and nervous sweat. The Polarius on board, no doubt a man already green about the gills from the rocking of the ship, brings out the sacred cage. The legionaries, sailors, and marines, all tough, battle-hardened men, fall silent, their eyes fixed on the feathered arbiters of their fate. This isn't some quiet, land-based consultation with a few aides present. This is happening on the heaving deck of a warship, surrounded by men whose lives hang in the balance. Talk about a captive audience. The Polarius scatters the grain. The chickens, perhaps a bit seasick themselves, or maybe just not in the mood for a pre-battle snack with all the shouting and creaking of timbers, refuse to eat. They don't just peck hesitantly. They flat out ignore the offering. This is bad, very bad. In the lexicon of divine signs, this is the equivalent of the gods sending a text message that just says nope in all caps. The Polarius, pale and trembling, would have had to report this dire omen to Consul Pulcher. Now, a more cautious commander, a Fabius Maximus type, might have taken this as a sign to delay the attack, to reconsider his strategy, perhaps to offer some extra sacrifices to appease whatever deity was clearly having a bad feather day. But Publius Claudius Pulcher was not known for his caution, or it seems, his patience with uncooperative poultry. Accounts say that upon hearing the chickens wouldn't eat, he flew into a rage. Frustrated, and perhaps believing this was no time for what he saw as superstitious dithering, he uttered the infamous line, "Bibant quoniam esse nolunt." If they will not eat, let them drink. And with that, he ordered the sacred chickens, cage and all, to be hurled overboard into the sea. You can just imagine the collective gasp from the crew. Even for hardened soldiers, this was a shocking act of impiety. It wasn't just disrespecting a tradition, it was like spitting in the eye of the gods themselves. The Polarius probably fainted on the spot, or started reciting every protective incantation he knew. It's one thing to get a bad omen, it's another to actively drown the messengers. That's not just bad form, it's practically inviting divine retribution. One might say Pulcher's approach to problem solving was a bit direct. Computer frozen? Throw it out the window. Traffic jam? Drive on the sidewalk? Not generally recommended strategies, then or now. The Battle of Drepana, which followed almost immediately after this dramatic chicken tossing incident, was an unmitigated disaster for the Romans. The Carthaginian admiral, Adherbal, outmaneuvered Pulcher completely. The Roman fleet was trapped against the coast and systematically destroyed. 93 Roman ships were captured, many more were sunk. Thousands of Roman sailors and soldiers were killed or taken prisoner. It was one of the worst naval defeats Rome ever suffered. And of course, everyone remembered the chickens. It wasn't a good look for Pulcher. Lost the battle, and he's a chicken murderer. Bad day at the office, Publius. The aftermath was, predictably, unpleasant for Claudius Pulcher. He was recalled to Rome and put on trial. And here's a mainstream historical fact for you. While military incompetence was certainly a factor in his prosecution, the charge of impiety for his treatment of the sacred chickens weighed heavily against him. He had defied the will of the gods, and the gods, it seemed, had responded in kind with a catastrophic defeat. He was heavily fined, his career in ruins. It sent a clear message. You don't mess with the sacred chickens, or more broadly, you don't openly mock the religious foundations of the state, especially when things go spectacularly wrong afterward. It's like blaming the weather forecaster for the hurricane, but in this case, the forecaster had feathers and was now sleeping with the fishes. The trial itself brings up some interesting points. Historians still debate the precise nature of the charges and the primary motivations behind Pulcher's conviction. Was it genuinely about religious sacrilege, a deep-seated fear that his actions had endangered the entire republic by angering the gods? Or was impiety a convenient, publicly acceptable charge to punish a commander for a colossal military blunder, a way to make an example of him without solely blaming his strategic or tactical failings? Some argue that by the late Republic, the religious sincerity of the elite was waning, and these rituals were seen more as tradition or tools for maintaining public order than as genuine conduits to divine will. Others maintain that belief in the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, ensured by correct religious observance, was still profoundly important. Pulcher's case probably involved a potent cocktail of both. Genuine religious outrage mixed with political opportunism and the need for a scapegoat. It's like when your favorite sports team loses and fans blame the referees, the coach, the alignment of the stars, and that one pigeon that landed on the field during the third quarter. Everything is a sign. Now, for a bizarre or tangential detail connected to this, imagine the fate of the Polarius who was on Pulcher's ship. There's no specific record, but you can bet he had a very uncomfortable time. Did he try to stop Pulcher? Did he leap into the sea in a desperate attempt to save the sacred cage? Or did he just stand there, aghast, watching his career and his sacred charges sink beneath the waves? One can imagine him later, perhaps giving testimony at Pulcher's trial, his voice still trembling. And then he said, "Let them drink. The horror, senators, the horror." It's also said that Pulcher's sister, Claudia, later made an impious remark in public when her litter was stuck in a crowd, wishing her brother were alive again to lose another fleet and thus thin out the Roman rabble. She, too, was prosecuted for her words, showing that impiety, or even the appearance of it, was a serious business in Rome, not just for generals who disliked poultry-based prophecies. The gods, it seemed, had very sensitive ears, and apparently so did the public prosecutors. The pressure on the Polarius in such situations must have been immense. You're not just feeding chickens, you're interpreting divine will for men who hold the power of life and death. If you report a bad omen, you risk the commander's wrath or being seen as an obstructionist. If you try to fudge the results, say by encouraging the chickens to eat when they're not inclined, you risk divine anger if things go wrong anyway. And if the commander just ignores you and throws your sacred charges into the drink, well, that's a whole other level of occupational hazard. It's not a career path for the faint of heart. You'd need nerves of steel, an encyclopedic knowledge of chicken dietary preferences, and perhaps a good lawyer on retainer. Wanted, soothsayer, must be good with birds, high-stress environment, ungrateful management, possibility of being thrown overboard. Benefits, free chicken feed. This incident with Claudius Pulcher became a cautionary tale, a historical meme almost, repeated for generations. It underscored the perceived link between piety and success, impiety and disaster. Even if an emperor or a general was privately skeptical, they would often go through the motions of the auspicia with great public solemnity. It was good for morale, it maintained tradition, and it showed the people and the soldiers that their leaders were respecting the proper order of things. It was a kind of sacred political theater. Think about an emperor like Augustus, a master of propaganda and image. He meticulously restored temples, revived ancient priesthoods, and publicly demonstrated his piety. Would he have dared to ignore a bad chicken omen? Unlikely. He understood the power of such symbols. He might have had a quiet word with the Polarius beforehand to ensure the omens were favorable, or at least ambiguously positive. Marcus, old friend, the gods are surely smiling on our campaign in Germania, wouldn't you say? Perhaps Fortuna might appreciate a little pre-breakfast appetizer today, just to get her in the mood. A subtle suggestion, a knowing glance, the gears of empire often turned on such unwritten understandings. Contrast this with an emperor known for his erratic behavior, say Caligula. One could almost imagine Caligula, if faced with uncooperative chickens, declaring himself a god and therefore not needing their opinion, or perhaps appointing his horse, Incitatus, as the chief Polarius just for laughs. The stability and perceived sanity of the emperor would have greatly influenced how these rituals were conducted and perceived. If your emperor thinks he's a deity, the chicken's opinions on troop movements might seem rather secondary. The chickens say no, well, I say yes, and I'm a god, so there would be a hard argument for a Polarius to counter. The reliability of the chicken omens was, of course, always a subject of some underlying skepticism, even in ancient times. Philosophers like Cicero, who was himself an augur, wrote extensively on divination. While he upheld the public importance of religious rituals for the stability of the state, his private writings sometimes hint at a more rational, questioning perspective. He recounts stories of augurs joking amongst themselves, one augur supposedly remarking that he was surprised two augurs could look each other in the face without laughing. It suggests that at least some of the practitioners were aware of the more performative aspects of their craft. It's like professional magicians. They know the tricks, but the audience enjoys the illusion. Did the gods really speak through that chicken's gizzard? Or did Marcus just have a really good hunch about the weather and a very well trained bird? Yet, the system endured for centuries. It provided a framework for decision making, a way to manage anxiety in the face of the unknown, and a powerful tool for social cohesion. When the omens were good, it boosted morale and resolve. When they were bad, it could provide a legitimate reason for caution or delay, potentially saving lives and resources, even if the chickens themselves were just having an off day. It's a peculiar kind of genius, really, outsourcing some of your toughest decisions to a creature whose primary concerns are worms and avoiding foxes. Maybe modern politicians could learn a thing or two. Mr. President, the sacred gerbil has chewed through the red wire on the policy proposal. The gods clearly disapprove of this tax hike. You continue your duties in the camp, cleaning the other cages, ensuring fresh water is available. The story of Pulcher is a stark reminder of the dramatic potential inherent in your new line of work. You eye the remaining chickens with a newfound respect, mixed with a little apprehension. They're not just birds, they're feathery bundles of potential prophecy, capable of making or breaking careers, winning or losing battles. You make a mental note to always be extra polite to Fortuna and her colleagues, and perhaps to learn how to swim, just in case your future employer has a similar management style to Claudius Pulcher. One never knows when a consul might decide the sacred poultry needs an impromptu swimming lesson. The cautionary tale of Publius Claudius Pulcher and his deep-sea diving chickens certainly left an indelible mark on the Roman psyche. For a time, it probably made generals and consuls think twice before dismissing an inconvenient omen. You can imagine a sort of Pulcher post-traumatic stress disorder among the Roman elite, a sudden aversion to seafood before a campaign, or an insistence that the sacred chickens be kept in triple-locked cages far from any large bodies of water. But as generations passed, and the immediacy of Drepana's disaster faded into historical anecdote, the relationship between Rome and its feathered prophets continued to evolve, subtly at first, then more dramatically. You find yourself, in our sleepy journey, noticing a gradual shift in the atmosphere surrounding the sacred chicken coop. The hushed reverence is still there, particularly on formal occasions, but sometimes late at night, when only the crickets and the crackling embers of the watchfires are listening, you hear a different kind of talk. Whispers of skepticism, a wry comment here and there, perhaps a junior officer, emboldened by a little too much wine, might joke about whether the chickens preferred red or white grapes in their divine mash. It's not outright rebellion, not yet, but it's the scent of change in the air, as faint and elusive as the smell of rain before a distant storm. During the imperial era, after Augustus so masterfully blended tradition with a new form of governance, the Auspicia ex Triputes continued. Emperors, for the most part, were meticulous in observing the outward forms of state religion. It was part of the imperial toolkit, a way to project an image of piety, continuity, and divine favor. Imagine Tiberius, that gloomy and suspicious emperor, peering intently at the pecking patterns, perhaps wondering if the chickens, like so many of his senators, were just telling him what he wanted to hear. Or Claudius, the scholar emperor, maybe he cross-referenced the chicken's behavior with obscure Etruscan texts on poultry divination, just to be thorough. One can almost picture a memo circulating in the imperial palace, RE Sacred Chickens, quarterly performance review. Fortuna, too, has been a bit hesitant with the barley, suggest adding dill to encourage more vigorous prognostications. However, the Roman Empire was a vast, cosmopolitan entity. New ideas, new philosophies, and new religions were constantly flowing into Rome from all corners of its sprawling domain. Eastern mystery cults, with their potent promises of personal salvation and elaborate rituals, gained immense popularity. Philosophies like Stoicism and Epicureanism offered different ways of understanding the universe and one's place within it, often emphasizing reason or personal virtue over reliance on omens and sacrifices. Against this backdrop of shifting beliefs, the old state religion, with its formal, sometimes rather dry rituals, started to feel a little quaint to some. The chickens, once at the cutting edge of divine communication technology, were perhaps beginning to seem like yesterday's news. Why ask a chicken when you can consult the stars, or be initiated into the mysteries of Isis, or simply meditate on the nature of the cosmos? You might hear a particularly hip Roman youth muse at the public baths. It wasn't a sudden collapse of faith, but more of a slow erosion, like a river gradually wearing away its banks. There were still moments of fervent belief, especially during times of crisis. A plague, a barbarian invasion, a bad harvest, these could send people flocking back to the old gods and their familiar rituals, chickens included. But the intellectual and spiritual landscape was undeniably changing. Writers and satirists, like Lucian of Samosata, though Greek, his influence was felt across the Roman world, poked fun at traditional beliefs and the often credulous nature of humanity. You can imagine him penning a hilarious dialogue where Zeus complains that the chickens are giving him contradictory advice, leading to divine scheduling conflicts. Mercury, tell that Polarius on the Rhine frontier that his chickens are out of sync with the ones in Syria. I can't be blessing two opposing battle plans at once. It's an ornithological nightmare. Here's a major historical fact for you. The official state sanction for practices like the Auspicia ex tripudiis ultimately came to an end with the rise of Christianity. In the late 4th century AD, emperors like Theodosius I issued a series of edicts that effectively made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. Pagan temples were closed, sacrifices were forbidden, and the old gods were gradually, officially pensioned off. This meant that the sacred chickens, as state-sponsored divinatory tools, were out of a job. Their official role, which had lasted for centuries, simply ceased to exist. No more imperial consultations, no more special grain, no more anxious generals waiting for a peck of approval. The coops were, metaphorically speaking, dismantled. Now for a bizarre or tangential detail from this period of transition. As the old religion waned, there were, of course, attempts by some to revive it or cling to its traditions. Imagine a die-hard traditionalist senator, perhaps in a quiet corner of his villa, secretly trying to conduct his own auspicia with his farmyard chickens, much to the confusion of his cook. No, that one doesn't count. It was just chasing a beetle. We need sacred pecking, not just pecking. Or consider the underground nature that some of these practices might have taken on. Were there clandestine chicken readers operating out of back alleys, offering dubious prophecies for a few denarii, like some sort of ancient Roman psychic hotline, but with more feathers? Dial 1-900 Prophet Hen, your future clucked live. Please have your offering of premium birdseed ready. And this leads us to another scholarly debate. How quickly and completely did these pagan practices, including augury, actually disappear after Christianity became the dominant and official religion? Some historians argue for a fairly rapid decline, especially in urban centers and among the elite, as imperial patronage docio. Others suggest a much more gradual transition, with many old beliefs and practices lingering for centuries, particularly in rural areas, or being absorbed and reinterpreted into local folk customs and superstitions. Perhaps the sacred chickens didn't entirely vanish but simply evolved. Maybe the farmer who checked if his rooster crowed 3 times before dawn for good luck was unknowingly echoing a faint memory of the Polarius and his solemn duties. The line between official religion, folk belief, and superstition is often wonderfully blurry. Did the last official Polarius simply shrug, take his chickens home, and start a small but surprisingly prescient egg business? The records are, alas, silent on his final career move. You can picture the final official chicken consultation. Perhaps it was a rather perfunctory affair, attended by a junior official who was already thinking about the upcoming Christian holidays. The chickens, unaware of their impending redundancy, might have given a perfectly good omen, a splendid tripudium solistimum, but there was no one left in power to truly care, or at least no one willing to stake a military campaign on it anymore. The world had moved on. The gods, it seemed, had found new ways to communicate, or perhaps humanity had simply decided to listen to different voices. The divine mandate no longer came with a side of birdseed. The skepticism that had been brewing for centuries finally found a dominant voice. Why trust a chicken when you could have faith in a singular, omnipotent God? Why look for omens in entrails or bird flight when you had sacred scriptures and theological doctrines? The intricate, sometimes contradictory, and very worldly pantheon of Roman gods began to fade from public life, taking their feathered messengers with them. It wasn't necessarily a moment of angry iconoclasm, like Pulcher with his chickens at sea, but more of a quiet fading, like an old fresco whose colors dim with time until the image is barely discernible. So what became of the sacred chickens themselves? Well, they likely just became chickens. They were probably absorbed into local farmyards, their divine lineage forgotten. No longer tasked with predicting the fate of empires, they could get back to the important business of being chickens, scratching for worms, laying eggs, and generally not having the weight of the world on their tiny feathered shoulders. It was probably a great relief for them. Imagine the stress of constantly being watched, your every meal a potential international incident. Oh, Jupiter, did I drop enough grain? Was that peck enthusiastic enough? The emperor looked a bit miffy today. Now they could just enjoy a good dust bath without worrying about causing a stock market crash or an ill-advised invasion. Looking back from our distant vantage point, snuggled in our beds, the idea of consulting chickens for major state decisions seems almost comical, doesn't it? It's easy to dismiss it as simple superstition, but for the Romans, for centuries, it was a vital part of their world, a way of navigating an uncertain universe, of seeking reassurance, and of binding their society together through shared ritual and belief. It reminds us that what seems logical or absurd is often a matter of cultural perspective and the prevailing worldview of the time. Who knows? Future generations might look back at some of our modern decision making processes, perhaps our reliance on complex financial models that still manage to crash economies, or our obsession with social media trends, and find them just as peculiar as consulting sacred poultry. They used to decide what to believe based on how many likes it got. How utterly bizarre, one might imagine a future historian musing. And so, the era of the sacred chickens drew to a close, not with a bang, nor a dramatic drowning, but with the quiet turning of history's page. The coops were empty, the augurs sought new professions, and Rome, and indeed the world, marched on, seeking its fortunes and its future in new and different ways. The gentle clucking that once held emperors rapt was replaced by other sounds, other voices, other certainties. But for a while, a very long while, the fate of one of the world's greatest empires could, quite literally, hang on a wing and a prayer and a well-aimed peck. Now, as the story of these feathered forecasters gently concludes in your mind, let the lingering images of ancient Rome, of solemn generals, and surprisingly influential poultry begin to soften and blur around the edges. The weight of empires, the anxiety of omens, the rise and fall of beliefs. These are grand, sweeping tales. But tonight, they are just gentle whispers to guide you towards rest. The cool pre-dawn air of the Roman camp has long since given way to the comfortable quiet of your own room. The concerns of consuls and emperors are centuries removed, distant echoes in the corridors of time. There are no urgent decisions to be made based on a bird's breakfast, no legions waiting on a signal from a sacred coop. There is only the stillness of the night, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and the growing sense of peace. Let any lingering thoughts of the day drift away like feathers on a soft breeze. Feel the support of your bed beneath you, a solid, comforting presence in the quiet dark. Allow your muscles to release any tension they might be holding, from your toes all the way up to the crown of your head. Imagine each breath you take drawing in calm, and each breath out releasing any lingering fragments of the story, any stray thoughts, any last vestiges of wakefulness. The world outside can wait. Its demands, its noise, its complexities will all still be there in the morning. But for now, this time is yours. A time for deep, untroubled rest. A time for your mind to be still, like a calm pool reflecting only the peaceful darkness. The sacred chickens of Rome have long since gone to their own roosts, and it is time for you to drift into yours, into the quiet sanctuary of sleep. Hey everyone, tonight we're peeling back the varnish on some of history's most celebrated artists to discover the often surprising, sometimes mundane, and occasionally bizarre ways they actually paid the bills. Imagine, if you will, not the serene, hallowed halls of a modern museum, but the noisy, dusty, and frankly rather fragrant chaos of a Renaissance workshop. Think less tortured genius in a lonely garret, and more highly skilled artisan trying to meet a deadline for a very demanding client who wants a painting, a new design for a salt cellar, and maybe a couple of parade banners by next Tuesday. It's a world where art and craft were inextricably linked, and the title artist often came with a job description that would make a modern gig economy worker's head spin. Frankly, with the apprenticeships starting at childhood and the sheer breadth of skills required, you probably wouldn't have survived this unless you had a very high tolerance for grinding pigments by hand and dealing with patrons who thought artistic license was something you could get revoked by the local guild. So before you get all comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small click for you, but it's a big thumbs up for the channel, and it helps me keep unearthing these sleepy historical tales. And as always, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always a quiet thrill to see our little community stretching across the globe. Now dim those lights, maybe get that fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself stepping not onto a polished gallery floor, but onto the rough-hewn wooden planks of a bustling Florentine bottega or workshop sometime in the mid-15th century. The air is thick with a curious cocktail of scents, the sweet, earthy aroma of linseed oil and drying paints, the sharp tang of turpentine, the dusty smell of gesso and plaster, the metallic scent of hammered gold leaf, and underlying it all, the faint, not unpleasant smell of wood shavings, melting wax, and even, perhaps, a hint of the master's lunch simmering in a back room. It's not a quiet place. From one corner comes the rhythmic thump-thump scrape of an apprentice grinding lapis lazuli into brilliant ultramarine blue on a porphyry slab. From another, the delicate tap-tap-tap of a goldsmith's hammer shaping a silver chalice. Older boys are busy transferring a master's cartoon drawing to a large wooden panel, their chatter punctuated by the occasional sharp instruction from a senior journeyman. This isn't just an art studio, it's a factory of creativity, a small business, and a vocational school all rolled into one. Forget the modern image of the solitary artist waiting for inspiration to strike. In the Renaissance, most artists began their careers as young apprentices, often as early as 7 or 8 years old. You would be indentured to a master for a period of years, learning not just the lofty principles of perspective and anatomy, but the very practical hands-on skills required to be a contributing member of the workshop. This meant sweeping floors, preparing wooden panels with layers of gesso, mixing paints, a laborious and often toxic process, tending the workshop fire, running errands, and gradually, if you showed talent, being allowed to work on less critical parts of a commission, perhaps painting in a background landscape, or the folds of a robe, or the gilded edge of a halo. It was less about self-expression and more about mastering a trade, a métier. Think of it as art school, but with more chores and a much higher chance of getting paint, or possibly molten metal, on your tunic. Many of these bottega were incredibly versatile. A master like Andrea del Verrocchio, for example, in whose Florentine workshop a young Leonardo da Vinci famously trained, was a painter, a sculptor in marble and bronze, and a highly skilled goldsmith. His workshop would have produced not only iconic paintings and sculptures like the Baptism of Christ, where Leonardo painted that famously ethereal angel, or the powerful bronze David, but also intricate reliquaries, fine jewelry, and perhaps even ornate helmets or parade armor. The line between fine art and decorative art was much blurrier then. An artist was a craftsman, a maker of beautiful and functional things tailored to the specific needs and desires of a client. You didn't just paint what you felt like, you painted what the Duke, or the church, or the wealthy merchant family commissioned and paid for, and they often had very specific ideas. Can you make the Virgin Mary look a bit more like my wife, but holier? And add our family crest in the corner, not too small. One of the foundational elements of this system was the guild. Artists didn't just hang out a shingle and declare themselves open for business. They typically had to belong to a guild, which regulated trade, set standards for quality, trained apprentices, and often provided a social and religious framework for its members. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. In Florence, painters typically belonged to the Arte dei Medici e Speciali, the Guild of Doctors and Apothecaries. This might seem odd to us, grouping painters with physicians and pharmacists, but it made a certain kind of sense at the time. Apothecaries were the ones who sold pigments, oils, and other raw materials used in painting, so there was a practical link. It also, perhaps, subtly elevated the status of painters by associating them with the learned profession of medicine. Sculptors in stone and wood often belonged to the Arte dei Maestri di Pietra e Legname, masters of stone and wood, alongside architects and builders, while goldsmiths had their own prestigious guilds. These guilds were powerful institutions. They could control who practiced a trade, resolve disputes, and even influence civic affairs. Getting on the wrong side of your guild was not advisable. It could seriously hamper your career prospects. Think of them as a combination of a union, a professional association, and a very strict HOA. Now, about those day jobs. While we remember these artists for their masterpieces, the bread and butter work of a Renaissance workshop could be surprisingly varied and sometimes not particularly glamorous. And here's a bizarre or tangential detail. Beyond altarpieces and portraits, workshops were often commissioned to produce a whole range of ephemeral items for civic festivals, religious processions, or private celebrations. This could include painted banners and flags, elaborate temporary triumphal arches, painted shields for jousts or parades, often with personal emblems or mottos, and even life-sized wax effigies. These voti, or devotional figures, were often commissioned by individuals or families to be placed in churches as thanks for a prayer answered, perhaps recovery from illness or survival in battle. Some were incredibly realistic, dressed in actual clothes, and were essentially stand-ins for the person offering thanks. Imagine Lorenzo de' Medici commissioning a wax figure of himself to be placed in a prominent church. It was a very public display of piety and status. Artists like Verrocchio were known to have produced such figures, so alongside crafting a timeless bronze, you might also be tasked with making a slightly eerie, life-sized wax version of your local banker, all in a day's work. Another common commission, particularly for newly married couples, was the desco da parto, or birth tray. These were elaborately painted trays, usually round or polygonal, given to women after childbirth. They would be laden with refreshments for the new mother and her visitors. The painted scenes on them often depicted auspicious themes, like the birth of John the Baptist, or scenes of happy, healthy babies and prosperous families. While perhaps not considered high art in the same vein as a fresco cycle, these were important and personal commissions that required skill and artistry. The artist might also be called upon to decorate cassoni, large, ornate marriage chests that held a bride's dowry. These were often painted with narrative scenes from mythology, history, or romantic literature. Oh, so the same hand that might be working on a solemn depiction of the crucifixion could also be painting a lively scene of Cupid and Psyche on a hope chest. It highlights the versatility expected of artists. They were visual storytellers across a wide range of formats and functions. It makes you wonder if Michelangelo ever got roped into painting a really fancy hat box for one of his patrons. Yes, it's for Pope Julius. He wants cherubs, lots of cherubs, and make them look divinely inspired, but also like they appreciate a good hat. Historians still debate the intricate dynamics within these workshops, particularly the division of labor and the concept of authorship. When we look at a painting attributed to a famous master, how much of it was actually painted by the master himself, and how much was contributed by his skilled apprentices and journeymen? For large commissions, like fresco cycles or complex altarpieces, it was almost certainly a collaborative effort. The master would typically provide the overall design, the disegno, and paint the most important figures or passages, while assistants would handle preparatory work, backgrounds, and less critical areas. Distinguishing the master's hand from that of his talented pupils can be a real challenge for art historians, leading to endless scholarly discussions and occasionally heated arguments over attributions. Was that beautifully rendered angel painted by the young Leonardo, or by Verrocchio himself, or perhaps by another, now anonymous, talent in the workshop? It's like trying to figure out who really wrote that hit song, the lead singer, or the quiet guitarist in the back who actually came up with the catchy riff. You can imagine the pressure and the camaraderie within such a workshop. Long hours, exacting standards, the constant smell of your craft clinging to your clothes, but also the opportunity to learn from the best, to be part of creating something beautiful and lasting, and the shared pride in a commission well executed. There was a clear hierarchy, from the rawest garzone, young apprentice, struggling to grind colors without spilling them, to the experienced journeyman who could replicate the master's style almost perfectly, to the master himself, juggling multiple projects, negotiating with clients, and overseeing the entire operation. It was a small, self-contained world, humming with activity and ambition. You'd learn not just how to paint or sculpt, but also how to manage supplies, how to deal with demanding patrons, how to price your work, and how to navigate the complex social and political currents of your city. It was an education in art, business, and life, all under one often very crowded roof, and you probably wouldn't get weekends off. Saturday? Oh, you mean Saints' Day? Slightly less hammering before noonday? Yes, we have that. Consider Filippo Brunelleschi, the genius who famously engineered the magnificent dome of Florence Cathedral. Before he became a celebrated architect, his early training was as a goldsmith. This was a common and highly respected path. Goldsmithing required incredible precision, a mastery of metalworking techniques, an understanding of design, and often skills in sculpture and enamel work. These were all transferable skills that served Brunelleschi well in his later architectural endeavors. His famous competition with Lorenzo Ghiberti for the commission of the bronze doors of the Florence Baptistery, which Ghiberti won, prompting Brunelleschi to focus more on architecture, was a competition between two artists trained in this demanding craft. It underscores that the artist was often a polymath, expected to have competence in multiple disciplines. You couldn't just be good at one thing. You needed a portfolio of skills. It was less jack of all trades, master of none, and more jack of all trades, and you'd better be mastering several of them if you want to eat. So as you drift deeper into this Renaissance world, picture these celebrated names, not just in front of an easel, but also leaning over a goldsmith's bench, carefully incising a design, or supervising the casting of a bronze statue in a fiery foundry, or perhaps even haggling with a pigment seller in the bustling marketplace for the best price on a bag of cochineal. Their day jobs were as varied as their talents, a testament to a time when art was not just an inspiration, but a hard-working, multifaceted profession. The beauty they created often emerged from a world of calloused hands, practical demands, and the daily grind of the workshop. As you move beyond the bustling apprentice-filled bottega of our first act, you begin to encounter artists who have climbed that arduous ladder of craft and skill. They've mastered the grinding of pigments, the casting of bronze, the delicate application of gold leaf. Now they stand as masters in their own right, their reputations preceding them. But even for these luminaries, the day job rarely simplified into just one thing. In fact, for figures like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo Buonarroti, the demands often grew exponentially more complex, their talents pulled in a dozen different directions by ambitious patrons who saw in them not just painters or sculptors, but architects, engineers, designers, and sometimes even political assets. Welcome to the world of the Renaissance superstar, where being a genius in one field often meant everyone assumed you were a genius in all of them, and they usually wanted proof. Yesterday, let's drift for a moment into the orbit of Leonardo da Vinci. When we think of Leonardo, we picture the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile, the profound drama of the Last Supper. But if you were his contemporary in Milan, serving Duke Ludovico Sforza, you might have known him less as a painter of ethereal portraits and more as a man who could quite literally move rivers, design terrifying war machines, or conjure up the most spectacular party the city had ever seen. When Leonardo sought employment with Sforza around 1482, the famous letter he wrote outlining his capabilities is a masterclass in understanding a potential employer's needs. He lists his skills in military engineering first, designing bridges that are light and strong, methods for destroying enemy fortresses, cannons, armored vehicles, his famous tank, catapults, and other machines of great efficacy and not in common use. Painting is mentioned almost as an afterthought, way down the list. Also, I can execute sculpture in marble, bronze, and clay. In painting, I can do mori, whatsoever may be done, as well as any other, be he who he may. It's like applying for a job as a chef and leading with your black belt in karate and your ability to defuse bombs. Oh, and I also make a pretty good lasagna. So a significant portion of Leonardo's day job for Ludovico Sforza was not spent quietly dabbing at a canvas, but rather as a military and civil engineer. You might find him poring over drawings of fortifications, advising on canal construction to make Milan's rivers navigable and its lands more fertile, or designing innovative water systems. He filled notebooks with sketches of hydraulic machinery, gears, levers, and all sorts of ingenious contraptions. Imagine him leather aproned, perhaps a smudge of grease on his cheek, explaining to a skeptical ducal official how his new Archimedes screw design will lift water more efficiently, or how a series of interconnected locks could revolutionize transport on the Lombardy plains. This was high stakes, practical work, crucial to the Duke's power and prosperity. His artistic eye for detail and his inventive mind were as valuable in designing a better siege engine as they were in capturing the subtle play of light on a sitter's face. It makes you wonder if he ever got his projects mixed up. Your Grace, I've finished the designs for the new court theater. It features reinforced catapults on the proscenium arch and a strategically placed moat around the orchestra pit, just in case the critics get unruly. And then there were the parties. Renaissance courts, especially one as lavish as the Sforza's in Milan, thrived on spectacle, a significant, if often overlooked, day job for Leonardo was that of a festival designer and impresario. He conceived and orchestrated elaborate pageants, theatrical performances, and all sorts of dazzling ephemeral entertainments for ducal weddings, state visits, and other grand occasions. This is where we find a truly bizarre and wonderful tangential detail about Leonardo's work. He designed incredible automata and mechanical marvels for these events. For the marriage of Gian Galeazzo Sforza to Isabella of Aragon, he created the Festa del Paradiso, a celestial pageant with moving planets and costumed gods. For a visit by the French king, it's said he constructed a mechanical lion that could walk forward, and when struck on the chest, its breast would open to reveal a cluster of lilies, the emblem of France. Imagine the gasps of the assembled nobles as this ingenious contraption performed its symbolic welcome. This wasn't just party planning. This was immersive, interactive theater design mixed with cutting-edge robotics, 15th century style. You can almost hear him briefing his team. All right, lads, the mechanical lion needs to roar on cue, not during the ambassador's speech. And for heaven's sake, make sure the lilies don't wilt before the big reveal. The Duke is very particular about his symbolic flora. These events, though temporary, were hugely important for displaying the Duke's wealth, sophistication, and power. Leonardo wasn't just an artist. He was a director of ducal public relations, using his inventive genius to craft an image of magnificence. Of course, his famous artistic commissions, like the Last Supper for the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie, or the massive, ill-fated equestrian statue of Francesco Sforza, the Gran Cavallo, which was eventually destroyed by French soldiers who used the massive clay model for target practice, a tragedy for art, but probably a great afternoon for the archers, were also part of his duties. But even these were often subject to the practicalities and pressures of ducal employment. He was known for being a slow and meticulous worker, sometimes to the exasperation of his patrons. You can imagine the prior of Santa Maria delle Grazie nervously hovering, wondering if the Last Supper would actually be finished in his lifetime, while Leonardo was perhaps off pondering the flight of birds or designing a new type of wrench. This leads us to a fascinating scholarly debate surrounding Leonardo's incredibly diverse activities. To what extent was his relentless investigation of anatomy, dissecting human corpses when it was highly controversial, botany, geology, optics, and his endless sketching of inventions driven by pure intellectual curiosity, a desire for knowledge for its own sake? Or were these pursuits primarily utilitarian, aimed at improving his art, understanding anatomy to render the human form more accurately, studying light to perfect chiaroscuro, or at developing practical solutions that would impress his patrons and secure his position? The truth is likely a complex blend of both. Leonardo was undeniably possessed of an insatiable curiosity, a mind that saw connections and possibilities everywhere. But he was also a pragmatist, living in a world where patronage was key to survival and success. His scientific and engineering endeavors undoubtedly enhanced his value to powerful men like Sforza, or later Cesare Borgia, for whom he also served as a military architect and engineer. His notebooks, filled with mirrored script and astonishing drawings, are a testament to a mind that refused to be confined to a single discipline. Was he the ultimate Renaissance man because he was simply built that way, or because being one was the best way to thrive in that particular ecosystem? Historians continue to explore the interplay between his genius and the often very worldly demands placed upon it. Your Grace, my studies of bird flight will not only lead to a flying machine, but will also allow me to paint angels with much more aerodynamically sound wings. It's a win-win. Now, let's shift our gaze to another titan of the era, Michelangelo Buonarroti. If Leonardo was the smooth, intellectually curious courtier engineer, Michelangelo was the fiery, tormented sculptor, fiercely devoted to his primary art form, yet frequently cajoled, pressured, and sometimes practically bullied by his powerful patrons into taking on monumental tasks in other fields. His day job often felt like a constant battle between his own artistic passions and the overwhelming ambitions of popes and potentates. He famously considered himself a sculptor above all else. "I am a sculptor," he'd grumble, even when faced with the vast, daunting expanse of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And here we hit upon a central, mainstream historical fact of the Renaissance: the profound and often difficult relationship between artist and patron. Popes like Julius II, who commissioned the Sistine ceiling and Michelangelo's own tomb, were not simply asking for pretty decorations. They were commissioning works that would glorify God, the Church, and not incidentally themselves and their lineage. They had enormous power and equally enormous egos. Michelangelo, with his own formidable ego and artistic integrity, often found himself in direct conflict with these powerful men. His day job included not just wielding a chisel or a paintbrush, but also navigating treacherous papal politics, managing vast and complex projects, and enduring periods of intense frustration. It's amazing he didn't develop a serious ulcer, or at least a strong desire to sculpt really unflattering caricatures of certain church officials. "Yes, Your Holiness, I'll get right on that ceiling, just as soon as I finish this small statue of a pope stubbing his toe in the dark. It's a personal piece." The saga of Pope Julius II's tomb is a prime example. Originally conceived as a colossal freestanding mausoleum with over 40 life-sized statues, it was meant to be Michelangelo's magnum opus in sculpture. He spent months, even years, at the quarries of Carrara, personally selecting the marble blocks, a physically demanding and often dangerous day job in itself. Imagine him, high on a mountainside, exposed to the elements, scrutinizing veins of marble, arguing with quarrymen, and overseeing the perilous transport of multi-ton blocks down treacherous paths. This was not the work of a delicate aesthete. This was hard, physical labor, project management on a colossal scale. But then Julius, ever mercurial, would change his mind, divert funds to other projects, like rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica or waging wars, and the tomb project would be downsized, redesigned, and delayed again and again for decades. It became known as the tragedy of the tomb, a source of immense frustration for Michelangelo throughout his life. He was contractually bound, yet constantly stymied. His day job became chief negotiator and frustration manager for the tomb of Julius II, deceased. And then there was the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Michelangelo, insisting he was a sculptor, not a painter, was famously reluctant to take on the commission. Historians still debate the nuances of this reluctance. Was it genuine artistic preference, a fear of tackling such a vast and complex fresco project, a medium he was less experienced in than sculpture, a negotiating tactic to extract better terms, or perhaps a bit of all three? Whatever the case, he eventually yielded to Julius II's iron will. And so, for 4 arduous years, his day job was to lie on his back on scaffolding, paint dripping into his eyes, enduring physical agony and creative torment to produce one of the most breathtaking masterpieces in the history of art. He even wrote a poem complaining about his aching back, his beard pointing to heaven, his face a rich mosaic. It's a poignant reminder that even for a genius like Michelangelo, creating transcendent beauty could be a profoundly uncomfortable and physically grueling occupation. "My neck feels like it's been wrestling a bear," he might have muttered to an assistant, "and I think I've permanently inhaled enough paint to qualify as a new color swatch." Beyond sculpture and painting, Michelangelo also became a highly influential architect. He designed the Medici Chapel in Florence, the Laurentian Library with its extraordinary staircase, and in his later years, he took over as chief architect of the new St. Peter's Basilica, designing its magnificent dome, a feat of engineering as much as artistry. These weren't casual side projects. They were complex, large-scale architectural undertakings that required profound understanding of structure, materials, and design principles. So add chief architect for the Vatican to his already lengthy job description. He was the ultimate, if sometimes unwilling, Renaissance man, his genius too vast to be confined to a single discipline, his patrons too ambitious to let him rest. The demands of these patrons could be incredibly specific and sometimes quite strange. They didn't just commission a painting of a battle. They might specify the exact historical or mythological scene, the key figures to be included, their poses, their expressions, even the colors to be used, often laden with complex symbolism related to their family lineage, their political allegiances, or their personal virtues. The artist's day job was to translate these often very literary or conceptual demands into compelling visual form. It required not just artistic skill, but also a good education, or at least the ability to consult effectively with scholars, diplomacy, and sometimes the patience of a saint. Imagine trying to explain to a powerful duke why his insistence on including 3 griffins, a unicorn, and his pet chihuahua in the nativity scene might be iconographically challenging. "Your Grace, it's a beautiful chihuahua, truly blessed among canines, but perhaps we could place him just outside the stable, for theological accuracy." These great masters, then, were not living in ivory towers. Their studios, whether in Florence, Milan, or Rome, were often more like project management offices, bustling with assistants, suppliers, and demanding clients. Their day jobs were a whirlwind of creation, negotiation, innovation, and sheer hard work, often pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible in art, engineering, and even theatrical spectacle. They were shaping the visual and intellectual landscape of their time, one commission, one invention, one impossibly ambitious project at a time. We've journeyed with the likes of Leonardo, juggling military engineering with party planning, and Michelangelo, wrestling with papal ambitions as much as with marble. Their day jobs were often dictated by the grand designs of powerful patrons. But as the Renaissance matured, the definition of an artist's work continued to expand. Some artists became savvy entrepreneurs, others influential thinkers and writers, and a few led lives so packed with drama and adventure that their artistic output almost seems like a quiet interlude. You find yourself now in a world where the artist is not just a maker, but also increasingly a marketer, a scholar, and sometimes a bona fide action hero. Let's drift north of the Alps for a moment, to Germany and into the world of Albrecht Dürer. While Italian artists often relied on unique commissions from wealthy patrons, Dürer became a master of a different kind of artistic enterprise, printmaking. Woodcuts and engravings, unlike paintings or sculptures, could be reproduced in multiples. This meant that an artist like Dürer could reach a much wider audience, and indeed manage the production and sale of his own work in a way that was quite innovative for the time. His day job, therefore, involved not just the meticulous carving of wood blocks or the incising of copper plates to create iconic images like his Apocalypse series or Melancholia Poésie, but also aspects of publishing and business management. Imagine him supervising his workshop, ensuring the quality of each print, perhaps negotiating with paper suppliers, and even dealing with issues of copyright. His famous AD monogram was, in part, a brand and a way to guard against imitators. He was essentially an artist publisher, an entrepreneur who understood the market for his work. He even undertook journeys, like his famous trip to Venice, partly to study Italian art, but also to sell his prints and manage his business interests. Got my latest series of engravings right here, folks. Limited edition, perfect for your Renaissance rumpus room or your devout contemplation chamber. Get 'em while they're hot off the press. He was probably just short of offering a buy one get one free on his less popular saints. This entrepreneurial spirit wasn't limited to printmakers. Even artists running large painting or sculpture workshops were in essence managing small businesses. They had to hire and train assistants, source expensive materials. Pigments like ultramarine derived from lapis lazuli were literally worth their weight in gold, manage commissions, meet deadlines, and ensure the workshop turned a profit. Andrea del Sarto, known as the faultless painter in Florence, ran a highly efficient and successful workshop. His day job was as much about being a good manager and businessman as it was about his artistic genius. It's a far cry from the romantic image of the starving artist. Many successful Renaissance masters were also astute business people. They had to be, otherwise they'd be the actual starving artists, and no one wants that, especially not the artists. Beyond the practicalities of business, Some Renaissance artists took on another crucial day job, that of the theorist and writer. They weren't content to just make art. They sought to understand its principles, to articulate its rules, and to elevate its intellectual status. Leon Battista Alberti, a true Renaissance polymath, was a pioneer in this regard. Though also an architect and artist, his treatises on painting, De Pictura, on sculpture, De Statua, and on the art of building, De Re Aedificatoria, were landmark works. He codified principles of perspective, discussed composition, and argued for the intellectual and moral value of the visual arts. His day job as a writer was to provide a theoretical framework for art, to argue that painting, for example, was a liberal art, on par with poetry or mathematics, rather than just a manual craft. Imagine him, not with a brush, but with a quill, carefully crafting arguments, citing classical sources, and laying down the intellectual foundations for generations of artists to come. He was essentially writing the textbooks before the school was even fully built. And then there's Giorgio Vasari, an accomplished painter and architect in his own right. He designed the Uffizi in Florence, which originally housed government offices. Vasari's most enduring day job turned out to be that of an art historian. His monumental work, Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, first published in 1550 and expanded in 1568, is the cornerstone of Renaissance art history. He meticulously, or sometimes not so meticulously, leading to later corrections by historians, gathered biographies, anecdotes, and critical assessments of artists from Cimabue to his own contemporaries, including Leonardo and Michelangelo, whom he knew personally. This was a colossal undertaking, interviewing artists or those who knew them, tracking down works, evaluating styles, and weaving it all into a compelling narrative of artistic progress. Vasari wasn't just recording facts. He was shaping a canon, creating heroes, and essentially inventing the discipline of art history as we know it. His day job as a biographer was to ensure these artists and their achievements were not forgotten, and in doing so, he profoundly influenced how we have understood and valued Renaissance art ever since. Just popping over to Michelangelo's place to get a few quotes for the book. Hope he's in a good mood. Last time, he just threw a chisel at me and muttered something about meddling scribblers. The intellectual labor of figures like Alberti and Vasari, combined with the undeniable genius and versatility of the artists themselves, contributed to a significant mainstream historical fact of the Renaissance, the dramatic elevation of the artist's social status. In the early Middle Ages, artists were largely anonymous craftsmen, their work often unsigned, their social standing not much different from that of a skilled carpenter or stonemason. By the High Renaissance, leading artists were celebrities. They were sought after by popes, kings, and emperors. They could command huge fees, live in fine houses, and associate with scholars and poets. Some, like Titian, were even ennobled by royalty. This transformation from artisan to intellectual, from craftsman to creative genius, was one of the most profound shifts of the era. Their day job now included being a public figure, a cultural icon, sometimes even a diplomat or a courtly advisor. And this brings us to perhaps one of the most flamboyant and adventurous artists of the period, Benvenuto Cellini. A brilliant goldsmith and sculptor, his Perseus with the head of Medusa in Florence is a technical marvel. Cellini's day jobs, as recounted in his incredibly entertaining and often wildly exaggerated autobiography went far beyond the confines of the workshop. For a truly bizarre and tangential detail, consider Cellini's self-proclaimed career as a soldier and marksman. During the sack of Rome in 1527, he claims to have been in the service of Pope Clement VII, manning artillery atop Castel Sant'Angelo. He even boasts of having fired the shot that killed Charles III, Duke of Bourbon, the commander of the imperial forces attacking the city. Whether this is entirely true is debatable. Cellini was not known for his modesty, but it paints a picture of an artist who was quite literally in the line of fire. His day job that week was less about chasing gold and more about dodging cannonballs and defending the Pope. It certainly puts a new spin on deadline pressure. Cellini's life reads like a picaresque novel. He was constantly feuding, brawling, fleeing from city to city, working for rival patrons, including King Francis I of France, getting thrown in prison, and executing a daring escape from Castel Sant'Angelo, and even, by his own account, engaging in a spot of necromancy in the Roman Colosseum with a Sicilian priest to try and recover some stolen jewels with the help of summoned demons. Spoiler, it was apparently a terrifying, if ultimately inconclusive, experience. Probably didn't list Demon Wrangler on his official guild application. While his primary craft was that of a goldsmith and sculptor, requiring immense skill, patience, and technical knowledge, his descriptions of casting the Perseus are incredibly detailed and harrowing. His other day jobs seem to involve being a professional adventurer, a raconteur, and a magnet for trouble. It makes you wonder how he ever found time to actually make anything. Sorry, can't finish that salt cellar today, Your Majesty. Got a blood feud to attend to. And then there's that pesky prison sentence I need to wriggle out of. Maybe next week. The lives and careers of artists like Dürer, Alberti, Vasari, and Cellini illustrate the expanding horizons of what it meant to be an artist in the Renaissance. It wasn't just about technical skill, it was increasingly about intellectual engagement, entrepreneurial spirit, self-promotion, and sometimes sheer audacity. This leads to a scholarly debate that continues to simmer. To what extent did the cult of genius that began to surround artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo, heavily promoted by writers like Vasari, reflect the day-to-day reality of their working lives? Did this focus on individual, almost divine inspiration downplay the collaborative nature of many workshop productions, the importance of patronage in shaping artistic output, or the more mundane business and craft aspects of their careers? Some argue that this genius narrative was a deliberate construction, part of the successful campaign to elevate the artist's status from craftsman to intellectual. Others contend that figures like Leonardo and Michelangelo truly were exceptional individuals whose multifaceted talents justified such a perception. It's likely a bit of both. Undeniable genius packaged with some very effective personal and posthumous branding. Sure, I had assistants, Michelangelo might have grumbled from beyond the grave. But did they argue with the Pope for 3 hours about the correct shade of blue for God's robe? I think not. That was all me. So, as our sleepy exploration of Renaissance artists and their surprising day jobs comes to a close, you can see that the path to creating those timeless masterpieces was often paved with a bewildering array of other tasks and talents. They were not just painters, sculptors, or architects, they were engineers, inventors, businessmen, writers, scholars, courtiers, and sometimes even soldiers of fortune. They navigated a complex world of guilds and patrons, of artistic rivalries and intellectual ferment, of meticulous craft and audacious innovation. Their day jobs were as diverse as the era itself, a testament to their boundless energy, their adaptability, and their enduring commitment to shaping the world around them. One brushstroke, one invention, one perfectly cast bronze, or one daring escapade at a time. Now, as these vibrant images of Renaissance workshops, courtly pageants, and daring artists begin to fade, allow yourself to sink deeper into the quiet comfort of your surroundings. The clatter of tools, the scent of oils and resins, the fervent discussions of art and life, let them all recede into the gentle murmur of history. The demands of patrons, the pressures of deadlines, the intricacies of guild politics. These belong to a world far removed from the peaceful sanctuary of your bed. There are no masterpieces to complete by morning, no complex theories to unravel, no adventurous escapades awaiting you beyond your door. There is only the stillness of this moment, the soft embrace of the darkness, and the gentle invitation to rest. Let your mind drift away from the busy streets of Florence or the grand courts of Milan. Feel the day's concerns, any lingering thoughts or worries simply dissolve like pigments in clear water. Your body is heavy and relaxed, sinking comfortably into the support beneath you. Each breath is a soft wave, washing away any remaining tension, carrying you further into a state of profound calm. The Renaissance artists, with their incredible talents and their surprisingly varied lives, have played their part in tonight's journey. Now, it is time for your own mind to rest, to be still, to recharge in the quiet hours of the night. The world, with all its own demands and wonders, will be there when you wake. But for now, surrender to the gentle pull of sleep, to the deep, restorative peace that awaits. Good night.